All right, welcome back. This is video 2 in the series of documentary editing using Adobe Premiere Pro. In the first video, we created our project, we imported media, we organized that media in bins, and then we went ahead and created our first sequence based on the screen resolution and other settings that we shot our video in so that they match up. So the next step here is to really launch into an assessment of the material that we have. Documentaries are always going to have a high shooting ratio, which means a lot of raw footage gets condensed down into a short story. So we have to make tough choices. And that is the most time-consuming part of documentary, is assessing the interview and pulling what we call select reels or sound bites from the raw footage. And I can't prescribe to you exactly how to do that for your particular documentary, but it involves a lot of playback.
So the overarching purpose of the donation station is essentially twofold.
A lot of listening, a lot of note-taking, a lot of assessing what's most important and what isn't. Okay, my interview here is relatively short because I don't want this video to take 3 hours. But sometimes it takes a long time to go through a long interview. But I've actually pre-selected a portion of this interview that I want to use, and I'm just going to show you a sample of how I would go through an interview and kind of break it down into those select reels or sound bites. So this is Andrea, and she's telling us all about the donation station.
So the overarching purpose of the donation station is essentially twofold. Our two components are: our goal is to support the local food economy and develop a robust local food economy, but also to support those in need and make sure that that local food economy is available to everyone in our region, not just those who can afford it or who can travel to a grocery store.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark that using in-out points. So in points and out points. So I'm going to go ahead and find the beginning of it, which is the very beginning of the raw footage, and I'm going to hit I for in point, or I can hit mark in this tab here. And it changes this dark gray band to a light gray band, and right now my out point is by default set at the very end of the whole clip. But I'm going to move it to where her soundbite ends and play back.
Can afford it or who can travel to a grocery store.
Brilliant. And then I'm going to hit O for out point, or my mark out. And so now you see this dark gray band, or this light gray band, is just for the selection of clip that I have here. Now I can do one of two things, and it's really up to you and how you want to work. I know I'm going to use this clip, so part of me is tempted just to bring it into my timeline and use my timeline, my sequence, as basically a storage bin for sound bites that I want to use. In order to do this, I click, hold, and drag the image into the timeline. So watch me do this. I bring it down, and you can see those blue blocks there. Now notice that as I bring my cursor toward that center line, and I bring it toward the very beginning of my timeline window, and I let it go, these clips, both video and audio, are going to occupy the V1 and the A1 tracks. It's important to do that. What we don't want to do is bring this in and let it go too early and then have a video track that's way up here on V3 and an audio track way down here on A3. Yes, they will play.
So the overarching purpose
is just fine, and they remain synchronized. But we set up a really messy precedent for ourselves. So we really, in our interview, we want to make sure that we bring this in to the A1 and V1 and A1 track.
So
Perfect. Now these clips are really, really small in the timeline. We can magnify that timeline a little bit using the plus keys or using our scale bar. If I move, click, hold, and drag this little node on the end of the scale bar, then I can zoom in on that track there. And again, plus minus keys also do that. And when I do this, the clip looks longer, but it's still only a select number of seconds, I believe 27 seconds, no matter how zoomed in I am. So now that I have my first clip in here, that's great. I'm actually going to show you another method of organizing your sound bites before you bring them into the timeline. So my next sound bite is here.
Distribution is really exciting.
Okay, distribution is really exciting, so I'm going to back that up.
Distribution is really exciting. It's a really great feeling to see kind of, at least at my job, what I do on a day-to-day basis, to see the kind of final product of what we've done at the farmers market and at the produce auction. To finally see that food go out is really exciting.
Good. And I don't need to be too precise. She says at the end, but I can trim that up later. I'm going to go ahead and hit my O key or my mark out and set this section aside. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to Make Subclip under the Clip menu or Command U. And I can give this subclip a unique name. And I'm going to say distribution exciting. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then what we're going to see is over here in my interview bin, we see what looks like a new clip was created as a slightly different icon. But this is what we call a subclip. So I just took this portion and I made it its own clip. So if I double click that, I bring it up into the source monitor to play it back.
Distribution is really
it only plays that portion of the clip. And so we can create little mini subclips of all the pieces that we want to keep. And I can do that. I can go to the next one.
I've also seen in Athens, we have this really vibrant local food community, people working to fresh local food. So in order to be successful at the donation station, because they are the ones who are distributing this food to people,
Okay, so now what I've done is I've created 4 subclips, and if I went back here I could create the first one as well just to stay consistent. So 5 subclips that I'm recognizing as important sound bites that I think are going to factor into my short documentary. You might have an interview that's very much longer than mine. My raw footage is just a few minutes because I've pre-selected some material in order to make this tutorial efficient. But you might have an interview that might go 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. I've done an interview that was once 3 hours of raw footage. If you can imagine going through that interview multiple times over and over again, making notes, transcribing dialogue, there's a lot of time that goes into assessing sound bites or select reels and then organizing them in your project panel. Now, when I'm ready to bring these over into my timeline, I can just simply click, hold, and drag from the project panel into my timeline. And the way that I usually do this at this point is I just kind of bring them in based on an order that I kind of just am feeling. And typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out the general chapters of my film. And for a short documentary, typically I fall into 3 general chapters. The first chapter, and this is based just on storytelling principles, is exposition. What, the who, what, when, where, right? And so if I have something like a description of the donation station, that might be first in line. So I'm just going to bring this here. And then affording local food. This sounds like, it's like it's great, all these farms and farmers, but not everybody can afford this local food. Well, that's part of the exposition. That's part of the issue that Donation Station is trying to address. So that might go next. And then what we might have are partners are important. This is how it gets done. So I'm going to put this next. And then if you want to see more of a bird's eye view to this, we can always zoom out a little bit and kind of see the whole picture. And then I'm going to put distribution is exciting and finish up with the local cycle comment. And what I've also done is you can see that I've left some gaps here. I've got basically, I kind of lay this out in chapters. So I've got my chapter 1 here, which describes the donation station, and then partners.
So in order to be successful at the donation station.
So if this is a setup of, hey, here's the problem and here's what the donation station does about it, our second chapter is more about how it gets done. So this is all about identifying assets in the community and being a responsible member of that community and being transparent. And then here at the end, this is really, the last chapter might be hope and vision for the future, right? So if we have the exposition and the problem, then we have the solution. Now we have our vision for the future. So when she talks about distribution, that's seeing the food go out to the local food pantries and the community kitchens, and that's really exciting for her because she gets to see how much good her work is doing in the community.
The whole approach, it's not linear. It's not just buying food and then giving it to people and that's it. In this great localized cycle.
Good. So now I've got a very rough edit, very, very rough, of what will be the bedrock or the foundation of my documentary. And I've got it in 3 sections, separated by a little bit of a gap here. And so that's the first part of the build. So now what I'd like to do is just take a little bit of a tangent and talk about setting up your sequence in a way that allows you to work more efficiently. So there are a couple of things that I want to point out, 3 things actually. One is track height. So we talked about being able to zoom in and out on pieces of media to make them bigger, right? But it's just affecting their length. So what I want to do is I want to see a little bit more height on my tracks. So if I click, hold, and drag the border between V1 and V2 and I lift up, it allows my V1 track to be taller and it gives me a visual thumbnail. This is really important, especially when we're editing B-roll, to be able to quickly see the thumbnail and see what that image is all about. Now I'm also going to do the same with my A1 track. I'm going to make this a little bit taller. So I hover over the border between A1 and A2 until my cursor changes. Then I click, hold, and drag, and I make that track taller. What this allows me to do is it allows me to see the waveform or the graphical representation of my audio. It also gives me this volume bar. So if I'm unhappy with the volume of the clip,
Local food, community, people.
I can change it by click, hold, and drag.
Value-added.
Click, hold, and drag on that volume bar, and it allows me to change the volume of the clip from beginning to end quite quickly right in the timeline. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'd just like to be able to see it. Okay, now that we have our track height adjusted, I'm going to show you another thing that's very, very helpful when working with clips in the timeline, and that is snapping. This little magnet icon that's in the upper left of your sequence window, if that is enabled, you will see it in blue. And watch what happens when I take a clip and I move it toward another clip. Watch what happens when I get close. Oh, it snaps into place. This is really helpful when we want to do some rough editing and when we want to just move clips together and we want Adobe Premiere Pro just to kind of assume that we want to sandwich those together and just make it happen without, let me zoom in here, without snapping on. I would have to look really, really close and get this to the exact frame where it meets the other one. And what if I go over too much? Uh-oh, I'm going to erase that part of the clip. I don't want to do that. So having snapping on just makes your work a little more efficient. When I get close, just sucks them together and collapses the gap. The last thing that I want to point out is this item called linked selection, which is also in the upper left of your sequence window. By engaging that, when I have media that has both image and sound and they are synchronized, if I click one, then the other highlights. If I drag one, the other goes with it. If this is not selected, if I click just on the video, only the video is highlighted. And if I moved that, uh-oh, this has fallen out of sync with each other.
Coming up in Athens County.
So we don't want that to happen. Premiere also gives us a little bit of warning, like, hey, these are out of sync by 10 seconds and 19 frames. So having linked selection on, especially if you're a beginning editor, makes things a lot more efficient and safer when you're dealing with synchronized sound. All right, so now that we have these clips in the timeline, I'm going to make some adjustments, and I can do that quite easily by highlighting, click, hold, and drag. But there are just some things that I want to do here. First of all, I like this whole selection here about describing the donation station, but I want to start with the problem.
I've also seen in Athens, we have this really vibrant local food.
I want to start with saying we have this really vibrant local food economy, but
actually make that feasible. Not everybody has the resources. I want to state the problem first, and then I want to describe the donation station, which is here. So the overarching purpose.
Right, so these two clips need to be flip-flopped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, hold, and drag, and I'm going to move this clip past the other one. And with snapping, I'm going to append it to the end. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave this gap here anyway. And so now when we play this out, it starts with the problem.
Local food.
And then it offers donation station as a potential solution. Now, there are another things that I'd like to do in this timeline just to kind of clean up what I've done, right? So I've moved my clips in here. I'm pretty happy with their order, their general order now. But when I set my in-out points and made my subclips, I wasn't being too precise about ums and ahs and where the clips began. So there's some things that I just want to change. And here's a good example. Let's zoom in a little bit and hear the first part of this clip.
I've also seen in Athens, we have this really vibrant.
She says, I've also seen in Athens, we have this really vibrant. It sounds like she starts to say a sentence, and then without completing that sentence, she starts another one. So I want this to begin where she says, we have this very vibrant local food economy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my playhead. If I click, hold, and drag this playhead, I can scrub through my footage. And I want to find exactly where she starts to say we. And then we should be the next word. So I'm going to leave my playhead here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the end of my clip. And you see my cursor change? First of all, I got those red ends. That means that I'm telling Premiere that I want to affect the end of this clip. And I'm going to click, hold, and drag it to where that playhead is. And if I play it from here,
we have this really vibrant local food community.
Perfect. That's exactly where I want it to begin. So that's nice and clean. All right, and so now we've got 3 sections with gaps in between. And of course, we've left a little bit of a gap here in the beginning where our intro to the film might go. And of course, we've got plenty of space on the end to put any outro or closing credits. But generally, what we want here is exactly what we see. We want chapter 1, and then we need a transition or a break between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And then we have a break between chapter 2 and chapter 3, and then whatever outro we will put onto the end. So that concludes video 2, now that we've laid in the bedrock of our story. The next chapter will pick up with creating those transitions and working with B-roll.